So when you then wrote the piece, The High Price of Stale Grievances, which was also in Quillette, you started with a quote from Thelonious Monk that I thought was sort of worth diving into here. They tried to get me to hate white people, but someone would always come along and spoil it. There's something about that quote that strikes me as so relevant to what's going on right now, that we are not looking at people as individuals, and that every time you do, you will be pleasantly surprised, because most people are not walking around in this state of hate.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's striking. I mean, I juxtapose that quote with another from the New York Times, from a New York Times op-ed published last year, which argued that black children should be taught to fear white children based on the history of racism in this country. And the quote was, "As against our gauzy national hopes, I will teach my boys, my black boys, to have profound doubts that friendship with white people is possible," right? So that got published in the New York Times in 2017. Sarah Jeong got hired, having written incredibly nasty tweets about white people in 2018 by the New York Times, right? It's disturbing to me that you can't really find at this point on the left, even on the mainstream left, just the simple articulation that a person's race does not matter to their moral worthiness, to their intellectual worthiness. It is an irrelevant character. You can't find the language of appeals to colorblind humanity virtually anywhere on the left at this point. That is disturbing to me.
How shocking is it to you? Because I think people are still kind of shocked. You know, I've been banging this drum for quite some time, and I think I see people waking up to it now, and I'm like, man, how didn't you see this? Mm-hmm. You know, these last couple of years, because it's so obvious to me that we've gotten here.
Yeah, no, it is shocking. I mean, I do remember growing up, you know, in the public school system in my town. We would have Martin Luther King Day assemblies. It was a very diverse town, maybe 25–30% black and 60% white. And we would get the I have a dream style ethic around what it means to be a human and how important or unimportant one's skin color is. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like such a good argument to me. And it is the best argument with regard to people's, you know, the assumed, I guess, what I mean to say here is that I've been in spaces at Columbia, for example, or conversations where my being black, it was obvious to me that there was an assumption of moral worthiness or of kind of heightened moral knowledge that I would have as a black person that a white person wouldn't have. And you know, I think I'm not the first to make this analogy, of course, but the religious analogy and the analogy to original sin is pretty apt, because this has a lot to do with black history also, because the way I see it, there are kind of two ways to study history. There's the conventional way, which is, you know, you study World War I, you study the causes and consequences, read different takes on the significance, and once you've studied all you need to know, you move on to the next topic. But then there's a religious way of studying history, which is, I mean, it's not enough to know the facts. We have to go somewhere on Sunday, every single week, and talk about the same stories over and over again. So this is, you know, it's the difference between how an atheist learns about the life of Jesus and how a Christian learns about the life of Jesus and relearns it every week for the rest of their life. In my view, how we're looking at the history of race relations in this country, the history of racism, we are more and more putting it in the religious category of history, where, you know, I can read a piece about the history of lynching in the New York Times almost, you know, once every 2 or 3 months, right? I mean, lynching is a decades-old crime at this point, and Jesus Christ, obviously it was a heinous stain on this country's legacy. You know, but the number of deaths that is the highest amount quoted in the New York Times with regard to how many black people were lynched in this country is around 4,000, right? every single year, twice that many black people die of homicide. And you just don't even hear about that in the New York Times.
So what do you make of the fact then, so this is something that like a Sean Hannity will talk about. He'll say that exact thing.
yeah.
And now if you say, and then people will say that somehow that makes him racist because he's focusing on black crime or something like that. So how do we have that conversation then? Because I think partly what's happening is the outrage, you know, someone mentions it. He happens to be someone obviously on the right. I don't know what his intentions are. I don't know the guy, but he's at least talking about it. What you just said, people aren't talking about.
Yes.
But then pays a heavy price to talk about it. That then has the chill effect that it's like people are like, all right, I'm not going to talk about it. So we can look at the crime statistics in Chicago every week, and you should care about these statistics, whether people are white or black or whatever. But people are just like, I don't want to touch it because I don't want these labels.
Yeah, it is decidedly. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, you know, I don't see myself as, you know, a natural ally to Candace Owens, for example, because there's so many other things that she says that you know, that I don't agree with, and I guess it's the Sean Hannity problem too, because if you can't criticize a Sean Hannity or a Candace Owens for all of the things that they're saying that are, you know, unjustified by the evidence, you know, in Candace's case, it might be climate change or whatever it is. For Sean Hannity, could be other things. Then I guess you just have to be able to make these subtle distinctions. But at the end of the day, homicide is the leading cause of death for young black men, aged 15 to 34, according to the CDC. It is not the leading cause of homicide for any other race or age group. Can we talk about that? I mean, is it the case that we're so close to white people turning the hoses on us again, to the Sean Hannitys and their supposedly deplorable, you know, followers, that we're just so, the threat of white supremacy is so ever-present, of resurgent white supremacy, that we can't talk about the leading cause of death among young black men. That is not sustainable. I mean, the fundamental problem I see with how the left in general thinks about race is that the concerns about race and racism are totally unattached to the degree to which black people are suffering on any given issue, right? So we're talking about the leading cause of death for young black men, and I never read about this in the New York Times. And I know that I won't, right? So this is a problem that is central. It is bigger than the problem of police violence. It is bigger than, you know, than the problem of microaggressions. It is bigger than the problems of systemic bias. And yet, there's virtually no concern for this on the left, because the way I see many progressives think about race issues is a perpetrator side concern, which is if the perpetrators of the problem are white, then it's worth talking about. If the perpetrators of the problem happen to be black, then it's not worth talking about. The problem with that is that it's untethered to any concern for the level of suffering on this side, on the victim side.
Do you think it's a fair estimation to say this is the new racism in a weird way? Like, it's almost uncomfortable to say it, but I had an educator in the UK here in the summer, Catherine Burble Singh, and that's basically what she said, that these people are now the racists, that the racist ideas of the day are actually coming out of the left. Now, I don't want to use the same tactics, right? I don't want to sit here and be like, they're all racist and blah, 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 because we know that that doesn't really get us anywhere.
Yeah.
The general idea of that, do you think that that's a fair way to frame things?
I wouldn't frame it. I mean, the way I would frame it is that there is a kind of racism on the left, and it's the kind of racism where the New York Times hires a writer who says that, who celebrates the idea that white people stop breeding, right? And doesn't apologize for it.
Yeah.
No concern with how that's going to translate to, you know, white people in this country who have vastly less privilege than, you know, the tech writer at the New York Times.
And what about that statement that they issued defending her?
Yeah.
You saw that where it said something about the hate she gets as a young Asian woman, and
Right.
it's like, what? That's now a new thing? Okay.
Yeah, that you get to be racist because you've gotten trolled online.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean so coming back to the question, I'm happy to call that a kind of racism for sure. It's the only reason I would say I wouldn't go as far as to say they are the new racist is because there are still racists on the other side.
Right.
And I fully expect there to always be some amount of racism in society and some amount of racist incidents. Like this is another problem with the way many on the left think about race is that they tend to view the problem of racism kind of like we view the problem of smallpox, which is to say something that can be fully eradicated down to the very last person who has it, and then we can put a date on the time when smallpox is no longer a problem forever. Whereas I would argue anyone who's really thinking rationally about this problem should view racism as more like a problem like murder, right? Like the murder rate in New York City used to be 10 times higher than it was today, just 20 years ago. It was absolute carnage. So the rate it's come down tenfold. New York is notoriously safe at this point. Something like 200 murders, 200 or 300 murders last year, right? What would it take to get the murder rate down to zero? To the point where there was not a single murder in New York City.
You'd probably have to murder everybody.
Yes, you'd have to. I mean, you have to embrace a totally totalitarian vibe from the top down. It could be done, but it would not be worth what it took to get there. You'd hit diminishing returns. So I view the problem of reducing racism, reducing racist incidents against black people, as a problem like homicide rather than smallpox, which is to say, you can certainly reduce it, and we have massively. But there is a point at which in a country of 350 million, there will always be enough people who are racist to justify a certain amount of racist incidents, and to fight it beyond that endlessly, you hit diminishing returns.
Yeah.